I'm Derek Galanis, and you guys are watching MMA Conspiracy Hour with my boy Todd Atkins and Miguel Iterate. Miguel worked for Bodog, Hook and Shoot, Euphoria, and ADCC. You can find Miguel at MMA Collector 74 on YouTube. And if you want to hear what I got to say about the fight game, it's at Derek Galanis on TikTok or at Derek Galanis on Instagram. If you want to hear about crime, the new wave of organized crime, it's at Derek Meyer Galanis on TikTok and at Derek Galanis at Instagram.
All right, this is Todd Atkins, and I'm back with Mystic Miguel Dorade. And today we're going to talk about something. I like opportunities where Miguel has a chance to kind of lean on some of his experiences inside the sport. And so we really wanted to talk about this Nate Diaz situation where apparently he's owed $9 million from the promoter of the Masvidal versus Diaz boxing match. And it's a little surprising that he would allow that to happen to himself, given that he's been fighting for as long as he has. But yeah, Miguel, I just wanted to kind of give you an opportunity to kind of start in on this story.
Well, first of all, obviously, especially with the numbers involved, but also with the way this goes down, it's a display of the evolution of the sport. I wonder what would have happened if, circa 2005, a promoter sitting in his hotel room, receiving the fighters to pay them, gets to Nate Diaz and tells Nate, "Hey, I don't have your money." He would have caught an ass whooping probably in that hotel room, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, I think Nate would have taken care of business that way back in the old days. A lot of fighters will have great stories, hilarious stories about not being paid by a promoter and how it was handled. A lot of them, you couldn't handle it that way nowadays, I think. One fighter, a New England fighter, I'm not going to remember his name, but a UFC veteran, they called him the hand grenade.
I don't. Marcus Davis.
That's him, Marcus Davis. Mm-hmm. Thank you. Marcus Davis had a promoter not pay him, or threatened to not pay him, and he said he was going to show up and kill his entire family with a hammer. And so the promoter paid him. He paid no one else on the card except Marcus out of fear. But that's the kind of story. I know several guys on a Florida show that weren't paid right away, and the situation got so stressful for the promoter live on the ground. Guys were not going to get on their planes and leave and wait for their money. They wanted to be paid there, that the guy had to go and get a loan from Dan Lambert to make the payments.
Was that Jamie Levine?
No, it was not Levine.
Oh.
Levine usually at least had his pay and pay scales figured out before, and he had the money up front before. Levine actually treated his fighters pretty good. In most cases, he was a guy who, some of his other business tactics were not on the up and up. We ran in Evansville. He decided to do a show in Evansville. And, we had a good reputation at Hook and Shoot, and he shows up and does radio interviews that, he was taking all the fighters to a morgue to pick out their caskets and just things like that, didn't take into account what other people had built. But he took care of his fighter. He wasn't one of those guys that consistently didn't pay. But there are many, many stories, especially from the early days. One of the things that happened when the boxing commissions came aboard is that the boxing commissions should insulate the sport from lack of payment for the fighters. The boxing commission now, in order for you to promote, asks the promoter for certain criteria. I looked it up for California right now. The promoter, in order to promote in California, and this fight was in Anaheim, he would have had to pay $1,000 just to get the license fee. Believe it or not, back in the old days, that could be a showstopper for some promoters. I'm sure some of the smaller promotions and things, the promoters say, that cuts into my profit. I'm not even going to bother. I've seen that number be higher, 5,000. I believe we paid 5,000 in New Jersey back in the mid 2000s for Euphoria shows. But right now, that boxing promoter this is his first and only promotion. That should be another red flag for the boxing commission. That, so for his first and only promotion, he filled out the paperwork, sent in his $1,000 check, and also had to send in a financial statement. Now, back in the old days, I was a matchmaker. I wasn't a promoter, but I was asked for tax information. I don't know if a financial statement is tax information anymore, but a financial statement that requires him to have at least $50,000 on hand. In other words, he's got to have cash in the bank or something like that. It's not like, well, I got a nice car I can sell to get 10 grand and, my house and this. No, you got to have cash in the financial statement that you can show. And that requirement's 50,000. Now, that doesn't help Nick Diaz anything or Nate Diaz anything. So the boxing commission is supposed to also has the ability to execute a bond, which means they see what the purses are going to be on the show, and they force the boxing promoter to take that money or a percentage of that money. But in the case of a first-time promoter, it should probably be the full purses of every fighter should be placed on a bond. And if he cannot pay the fighters at the end of the day, the boxing commission is able to break the bond and make the payments so that everything is kosher and everybody gets paid. That's the main function of the boxing commission. So when you get to $8 million purses, now we're in new worlds, I could tell you a couple of stories. There was a show in the Dominican Republic with great fighters. John Fitch was there, Paul Bonatello. There were international fighters and things. And that boxing promoter, MMA promoter, flew everybody in. They did the show and then didn't pay anybody. He was gone. And the Dominican Republic, you're stuck. Those guys are still waiting for checks. And the reason for that is there's no boxing commission. The boxing commission now, part of the lawsuit, now Nate's probably got enough that he'll deal with the promoter himself, and he doesn't need the boxing commission to be involved in. But in the case of a lower level fighter, that's exactly what the boxing commission's job is in a catastrophic case like this, where people are not being paid. The guy put in a hard 6 rounds. Now he wants to be paid. He's not getting paid. He goes to the boxing commission. The boxing commission receives a copy of the contracts from the promoters. There are games that can be played there. In other words, the boxing promoter and the fighter usually give a 1-page contract that says he's fighting so-and-so at this weight class for this purse, and they don't include the entire contract. So what does that contract say for Nate Diaz for this fight? Does it say $8 million? Because the promoter can't be that stupid to promise him $8 million just off the top for this fight, especially unless he's, a Saudi. You know what I mean? So that contract, which is what the boxing commission was dealing with, might say any number, 100,000, 50,000, or whatever. The interesting part is the rest of the contract, which the boxing commission probably was taken out of the loop on. And that is the percentage of pay-per-view sales. Now, I'm not sure that this fight pay-per-view sales warrant an $8 million paycheck. I don't know how many. Can you look up and see if that pay-per-view number is out there, how many of this sold? But whatever that is, Nate may think, also Livegate. I don't know what the Livegate was, but Nate, when you're trying to get a guy like Nate with his name recognition, you think he's going to make your card. You've got an opponent almost, equal or almost equal. You could choose either one, toss them up. But you're talking about a big name main event. The guy probably promised them a lot of revenue sharing. Now, usually when there's no payment, it means that, the ticket sales weren't what expected. In the case of pay-per-views, I guess rarely do pay-per-view guys not get paid. But in the case of the pay-per-view, the numbers didn't meet up with what was expected, so they're not able to make payment.
I'm looking up the gate.
The boxing commission may not be aware of the entire arrangement that Nate is talking about. Let us have it.
Hold on a second. I want to make sure I got the right one. It did TNA numbers. That's what it said. Crowd was 13,767. Gate was 1.25 million.
Okay, that doesn't
And
add
no
up to 8
one bought
million
the
for Nate.
pay-per-view. That's what they're saying. Nobody bought the
Yeah.
pay-per-view.
Yeah, I 13,000 is good. A nice crowd. If it was in a 20,000 seat arena, it's 60% full. It's not even a full house. You can see why the promoter might have been disappointed. He may have had, higher dreams. But again, how does that up to for Nick? Like I said, if the contract that they signed was simple and the one pager that they handed the boxing commission said Nate will get $8 million, then this boxing commission will also help Nate with the lawsuit and execute getting that money from him. Now, if this guy's not worth $8 million, he'll never get it. The guy just declares bankruptcy and he's done.
Yeah, it was in Honda Center, which holds 18,336.
Like I said, 60-70% full.
Yeah.
It's a nice house. They did. I mean,
Yeah.
Nate and
first effort.
Are big names. They're kind of a.
If they fought in the UFC, that would have been a sellout.
Yeah, they're past their prime, So at this point, you've got that effect where it's like guys are, moved on and realize that they're both a little burnt out. But 1.2 million means to me that, Nate should make 150. George should make 100. Since George lost, you want to give him 100 and 100. So Nate makes 2. The other guy makes 1. And when vice versa, you get 300,000 for your main event. Those guys ain't going to fight for that.
Yeah, it all sounds screwy. And especially with Diaz, he's fought a long time. His brother's fought even longer. He's been around guys that have fought from the beginning. Dave Terrell, Jake Shields, so on and so on. To make a mistake like this is pretty shocking.
I don't know if it's quite a mistake. I think it's that he got lackadaisical and didn't realize that this was possible. That he's a big enough name that he hasn't been approached by crooks anymore. And also he's got that veneer of, look, he might be a street kid. There might be times where, he's a little punch drunk in his interviews and stuff like that. He's always been a good, savvy businessman. Him and his brother. I think they've been well taken care of. They've had issues like from where they came from. Like, Nick had the famous faux pas about talking about not paying taxes and things like that. But those things all correct themselves. And now, they've got some money put away. So I think the main thing for Nate is that Nate didn't even realize the danger he was in to not get paid here. But again, where does the $8 million payday come from? Maybe he's suing him for damages using his name and whatever, and there's some increase there. But if the promoter promised him in some way, shape, or form $8 million, because the gate plus the pay-per-view doesn't add up to $8 million. So even if you said, Nate, 100% of the gate is yours, 100% of that, his paycheck won't be $8 million.
Mm-hmm.
So where does the $8 million number come from? Is it damages that he's trying to get on top of it?
Yeah, and it's like
then he's on his own. Then the boxing commission won't be helping him.
Like his manager.
Did he get paid a portion of the money, or did he get paid zero? So those are legitimate questions to see how this will go for Nate.
Right. What I mean is, never heard of the guy, never done a show before. Right there. This isn't Bob Arum. This isn't Matchroom Boxing guy, whatever. I forgot his name. But those guys, you could say, all right, they're going to pay up. But this guy, you don't even know who he is.
I agree. This was his first promotion. Again, there are a few things. Again, this is tools in the old days that don't quite translate to the modern game, right? So, like, for example, as a small promoter, if I decide to step it up and I tell fighters, we're going to be at the Honda Center. Fighters call the Honda Center, and the Honda Center is advertising MMA and boxing on a certain date. They know the guy paid for the venue.
Still not enough for me.
Exactly, especially if you're expecting $8 million in. But if you're, let's say you're expecting a $15,000 paycheck, those venues are expensive. So you're at least assured the guy's got a certain amount of money. But so these are the open questions. First, on Nate's part, and Nate, like I said, he's not unsavvy. He's savvy with money. And he always knew his value. He always knew he was underpaid in the early days. And but where does the $8 million number come from?
Yeah, what
Because-
promoter on the planet would pay Nate Diaz $8 million?
Yeah, only
Serious
somebody,
promoter.
Yeah, the
None.
UFC might be able to do it, but they would have to run their whole machine.
They're not going to do it.
Well, I wonder how much he made for Conor. If Chael
Not $8
Sonnen
million.
versus, well, if Chael Sonnen versus Anderson Silva made Chael $8 million,
I
and he
don't believe
suspects
that. You believe
No.
Chael?
You know, in respect to that, I have a tendency to say yes, because he runs the risk of having the promotion or somebody who would know come out and say that's a lie, and that would hurt his credibility, and he's not dumb. And I don't think he would hurt his credibility. So I believe that number. You're right. It may be suspect, but whatever the point is the money is generated to pay them. Keep in mind, so now Conor and Nate did 2 million pay-per-views, maybe. I don't know what the number is, but say it was 2 million pay-per-views at $80 a pay-per-view. Now you've got $18 million there to chop up, plus replays, plus all that sort of stuff. So, and keep in mind that we suspect the UFC keeps a lot of money, but it would take that type of machine to generate that kind of payday for a fighter. So, yeah, when you have a first-time promoter who's never done it before, that's got the Honda Center, but nothing else, and, yeah, he should have realized, I'm not going to get $8 million, but I'll take 200,000 and pocket that, and I'll be that's what I'm going to get. I'm good with that. You kind of got to know. If he really thinks he was going to get $8 million from this guy, unless the guy's like a Saudi, where it's like, he's got the recourse, and maybe at the end of the day, he'll just pay you from his own pocket. But I don't think that's the case here either. No one's ever heard of the guy. So I wonder on George's end what George is saying. Did George get paid?
I didn't hear anything about George.
Less, right?
Yeah.
Again, George, I know George.
Right.
And as George has gotten bigger, I don't think George is going to fight for cheap anymore. I got him cheap. You know what I mean? In the beginning of his career, he put in his dues. So I don't think he was going to take, $80,000 for a fight of this magnitude. He was going to need to get paid. So was his promoter stupid and just promised him absurd amounts of money? Because then George is probably not paid either. So, yeah, it's a weird situation. Back in the old days, this is 2003 in Chicago, there was a promoter named Ed Kim. And Ed Kim kind of fits the same bill as this promoter here. He's a guy that he was young, talked the talk, flashed the right amount of money at the right times, so that people suspected that he would do, a decent show. I think the show was called War Cry. It's a one-time show. Chris Lytle was on it. Chris Lytle's still waiting to be paid. Chris Lytle fought Laverne Clark. Laverne Clark was no joke back in the old days. The guy made some solid fights. And then the problem was that he wasn't a promoter. He was a fanboy that wanted to make the fight. And there you're in a situation where, they didn't print posters. They didn't do all the little promotional tricks that you do for a relatively local show like that. And, he's got $50,000 in payouts. Now, in that case, the old story was that him and his parents, they were probably able to pay, but his father was like, what the hell did you do? I'm not paying that. So he had to disappear.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead. Continue,
so here's the thing is I think you hit the nail on the head earlier. Masvidal and Nate Diaz is a fight, even in boxing, that should have had a promoter with pedigree. because you can never know on the promotional end. You don't want, even if the promoters got the money, like Bob Arum could pay them $8 million each and have the show completely tank, and he could still afford to pay them. But Bob doesn't operate that way. You want somebody with the whole promoter implies promotion, right? You've got to be able to get the word out there in such a way that the tentacles spread and you get crossover audience and you generate the real money that comes in. The UFC is excellent at doing that. You're right that they ran the risk by doing it with a one-time, first-time promoter who has no pedigree in selling out shows or, doing this. At least sell out, the Indiana War Memorial a couple of times to let me know that you've got some ability.
Yeah, he didn't even have his own promotion. So that, I mean, there's so many red flags, it's not even funny.
Yeah, and again, Nate's probably at the point where wherever the $8 million numbers come from, let's assume it's not Nate making it up or pulling it out of the air. Let's assume this guy somehow promised to me, you'll probably make 6 to 8 million on this, once everything's done. Let's assume that that's the case. Like with Connor, where we talked about how much money moves his needle, that was enough money to move Nate's needle. He's made some money. I'm hoping he's got a couple million in the bank already because he's put in the work. And at some point, like I said, they cleaned up their act and got taken care of by people they trust. That's the key with the Diaz brothers to me is once they found people that they trust, that they don't have to worry about it, then, they can operate and do what they do. And they had money getting put away and getting taken care of. And that's a good thing. But yeah, something broke down here because that circle of trust, it can't be there with a first-time promoter. You're right in that you need to show me first.
Yeah. And explain to people how a guy can get away and not have to pay the fighters once it's, because people think, oh, eventually they'll get their money. They may never get it, like you said. Explain how that can happen.
First of all, if he owes Nate $8 million, then he has to have $8 million. And I just told you what the minimum requirements were for the California Boxing Commission to issue a license. Yes, the Boxing Commission requires a financial statement, not taxes. And the financial statement needs to show $50,000 in liquidity, $50,000 cash on hand. So if the guy doesn't have the money, here's the other part of it is the guy will never promote again. That's the ultimate issue there because, you assume that's why promoters that do this for a living and are always promoted, like a Monty Cox, always had to make sure you got paid because he made money. He had his promotional ability. He made money. And if he failed to pay the fighters, his promotional license would go away and he would not be able to make his money and work anymore.
Right.
But when you have a first-time promoter with no pedigree, you never know. Is this guy planning? If you're not planning 80 shows, I'm going to do 80 to 100 shows over the next 10 years. That's my plan. Then guys of this pedigree should definitely stay away from them. Those one and done people, don't have that. So now if this guy doesn't have $8 million, he declares bankruptcy on the lawsuit. Nate doesn't get his money. He never promotes again. And that's the end of the story.
Yeah. It amazes me because not only did they catch it, but you'd think some of the other guys who have been in the game a long time might have hit Nate up and said, hey, man, are you sure you want to,
Yeah. What I don't know in the buildup was what the promoter told them. Because sometimes, like in the case of Ed Kim, because it was a local show in our area, he talked. He talked the talk. Fighters were taken out beforehand and, they signed what seemed to be legitimate contracts and things like that. And he had the name properly incorporated and he had done some of the work like that. And that's in there. And then you got a nice venue. That's enough to convince people on a lower level. How do you convince somebody? I'm sure I'll get my 8 million.
Yeah.
You gotta have some amazing ability, maybe Nate was with him one time in a Vegas casino and saw him drop 10 million in a day. That
It's
would
possible.
convince. That would be like, well, the guy's got money, right? But that's probably not the case. And so, yeah, I think Nate and Masvidal kind of were sort of eager. They heard a big money number that enticed them, and they didn't realize that this could go full circle back to the old days where they came from, where you got to worry about them about yourself getting paid. They
Right.
haven't had to worry about not being paid in at least more than a decade. That's
the
the other
one thing
part.
we can say good about the UFC. You don't have to worry about them paying you what they say they're going to.
Yeah, the UFC and other promotions at lower levels because of the boxing commissions. The boxing commissions are able to short, like if you're making $900 for a fight and the promoter doesn't pay you, the likelihood is that they put some money on bond and that the pressure of the boxing commission saying you'll never promote again and over $900, is it worth it? And, at the end of the day, a guy who works at Walmart that promoted a show saves up 3 weeks worth of pay and pays just to clear his name.
Mm-hmm.
So at the lower levels, also the boxing commissions have eliminated a lot of those stories of guys that just bailed out on the money. So that's what happened here. Most likely is the like a lethargy or like you became accustomed to being paid. It wasn't no longer an issue that you were going to show up. Is this guy going to pay us? It doesn't look like he sold tickets. Is he going to have the money? That worry in general doesn't exist anymore in the sport. And
do we even see who the promoter was for this?
yeah, I had his name here on BoxRec. It gives
Okay.
you.
Does he have? Is he a head of a company or?
That I don't. I'll tell you what it says on BoxRec. So BoxRec lists the. Oh my God! Hold on a second.
The reason I ask is because you're going to sue him for $9 million. I don't even know he has a $9 million.
Yeah,
He probably doesn't even have 1 million.
You could sue me for $9 million all day long.
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to get that money out of me.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's the thing is the promoter. How did he convince guys of this level that you're going to get paid? How could they be so sure? How could their lawyers happen? It's really one of those very interesting questions of how you get to this point in this modern day and age, because that's not the way the game goes.
His name is Solomon Engel. So I want to see who this guy is. His entity is called Fanmio.
Okay, hold on. Now, according to the event listing on BoxRec, the promoter Solomon Engel and Jorge Masvidal co-promoter. The matchmaker is a guy named Eric Bottger, Bottjer, and Eric is an established. There's one way that the boxing promoter could, is you have an established matchmaker as a front man, and it looks like that may be the case here. He has 17 pages of events listed on BoxRec as a boxing promoter dating back to 1992. Boxing promoter out of Pennsylvania, Virginia. So he's an East Coast promoter. Did some promotion in Maine, the Armory. Most of these don't even list a venue. They just list the city, Falls Church, which hints at small venues. You know what I mean? So I'm not sure what other major, we'll have to look it up. Now, this adds a little bit of a different twist because this matchmaker would have been the front man for the promoter, talking the fighters into thinking that they were going to get paid.
What I'm doing right now is looking up what is Fanmio.
Okay, so the event prior, so check this out. So the event prior.
You know what it is? Fanmio is something like Cameo. It says it brings fans closer to their favorite celebrities through video messages, personal one-on video meets, things like that. That's what Cameo did, the Cameo app.
Yeah.
So it sounds
So
like
check this out. So this is how this goes. So the matchmaker, Eric Botcher, first of all, he's got shows programmed in September with Roy Jones and his promotions. So he has not had any effect, though I would almost guarantee you as a matchmaker that because his reputation was also the one that was used to lure these fighters. And the event prior to the Masvidal fight was a month earlier. Was at the Caribe Royale or in Orlando, Florida. I'm not sure how big that or small that venue is. It looks like it was like a 12 fight boxing card. The main event or the top listed fight was a 10-0 fighter against an 8-4 fighter. There were fighters with records like 11-26-4, 26-30, 5-0, 8-0. So this looks like a typical smoker card where they're bringing in, undefeated guys and padding their records. This is not a pay-per-view card. This is not a big money card or anything like that. So this guy, in his case, who knows what his motivation was? Maybe he was paid well by the promoter. The promoter told him, we'll take care of everything. And he was fooled and befuddled. I wonder if he'll suffer any repercussions because at the end of the day, his signature will be on some of those contracts for the payments. So it is going to be an interesting situation, but I think we just got to the bottom of how a first-time promoter executes a major card like this, and that one of those ways would be to get a veteran matchmaker as a front man.
Yeah, it's an interesting kind of like rabbit hole to go down or book to try and read, how these guys get fooled. Because like you said, from our times, being out there on the internet and whatnot from back in the 90s, we saw these kind of stories pop up here and there. So-and-so didn't pay. So-and-so didn't pay. This show didn't pay. That show didn't pay.
He did the show prior, and he's done, Eric Botcher, the matchmaker, has done about 6 shows already this year. So he did one in Orlando, Florida. He did one in the Trop Casino in New Jersey. I've done the Trop Casino in New Jersey. I've done the Taj Mahal in New Jersey. I've done the Trump Plaza in New Jersey. And I've done the Boardwalk Hall in New Jersey. And the Trop is the smallest of the venues there. It's a nice venue. It's a casino, obviously, but it's a nice venue. But you're talking about 2,000 people in theater seating with the ring probably on the stage, not surrounded by fans, but fans on half the stage. You may be able to put some bleachers on the other side and do that. So this guy, from what I can tell, doesn't have a pedigree of major shows like this. So you could see maybe why he wanted to be involved would be to, cross over to the next level and promote a big show. And, probably $1.2 million in gate and 13,000 people might be the biggest show he's ever promoted. Before that, he had a show in New York at something called Sony Hall. I'm not sure what Sony Hall is. It might be the old Felt Forum in Madison Square Garden. It might be something else. But again, 2-0 fighter in the main event against a guy who was 11-10. 20-1 guy against a guy 24-6. That's a pretty competitive match as a co-main event. But no boxing name that completely jumps out as a crossover name. USA, New York. So it was in Manhattan. I'm going to look up Sony Hall to see if it is the Felt Forum. That would mean that it's adjacent to Madison Square Garden and is about a 5,000 seat arena.
And the manager needs to do his due diligence as well and look into these guys and what they've done.
No, Sony Hall is in the theater district on 46th Street, and it says it's owned by Blue Note Entertainment Group. So it's probably similar to the Trump Taj Mahal. Yeah, it's not the Felt Forum. Looks like it's in the basement of the Paramount Hotel. And the Paramount's an old school venue in New
Yeah.
York as well. But again, you're not, so this promoter hired a matchmaker that was putting in the work at a certain level and told him, we got the Honda Center, we're getting 2 former UFC pay-per-view stars in the main event. And, from there, the ball gets rolling. I don't know who's in the wrong here. Obviously, the promoter is the guy who put it all together, but you would expect also a matchmaker with this pedigree. Like, I turned down promoters. I was asked to work on shows I wouldn't work on because you get a feeling for the promoters.
Yeah.
You got a feeling these guys have no legs, or whatever your intent is. I would think Botcher would think, he's been doing shows since the 90s, so this is what he does. He's got a reputation. He wants, I don't blame him for wanting to take it up a notch, but at this point, if you've been working since the 90s, you're in your 40s, 50s, or should have a little bit of savviness around you and not let yourself be fooled by a one-time guy who just talks.
Right. And the manager too. I mean, it's the manager's job to look into that and say, look, the guy behind this has never done a show. Maybe we should stay away from this.
Yeah, this is it. I think you're right. I think it sums it up that in a way it's going full circle in the sport in a cyclical fashion that happens. The sport is about cycles. Combat sports are about cycles in many different ways. You do get the feeling that Nate and George, both guys who, when they started their careers, definitely fought in promotions where they were worried about getting paid.
Yeah.
Maybe even had to deal with a late payment or a lack of payment on certain occasions, and had to deal with that and dealt with it in their own ways. As you know, they're both rough boys, so it's not like, they didn't threaten to whip the promoter's ass or anything like that. But they haven't had to deal with that in a decade, more than a decade. So they got caught by the cycle of, you got a new thief. This all sort of reminds me, the $8 million reminds me of a story completely unrelated, but that you do get to the point where you just think, how does this happen? And I'm from New York originally, and at some point, probably in the 90s, maybe in the 80s, but back in the old days, there was like newspaper headlines that the New York Islanders hockey team was being sold to a new owner and stuff like that. And at the end of the deal, at the end of the day, the deal fell apart because the guy had no money. It was a complete fraudulent attempt at buy. How do you even get to the point where the newspapers are reporting you, and the guys that are going to take your money? At that point, what were the Islanders worth? $100 million. It wasn't chump money ever, But now they're maybe worth $1 billion, But back then, even $100 million exchange for the New York Islanders, it would have to be Donald Trump buying them for you to be comfortable, And here was a guy who was fraudulently making up the idea to purchase them and got to a certain level where it was reported in the news. So these guys, that's why you talk about the cycle. This type of thing, even with big money doesn't ensure that everybody's on the up and up.
Right. I mean, I remember when Ryan fought in Super Brawl, him and James Zikic were with Frank Shamrock. And there was something in the contract there that I don't know what it was, but if XYZ happened or whatever, they didn't get paid. That TJ didn't have to pay him. And Frank just said, don't sign these contracts. We'll fight, just don't sign the contracts. And then I'll get the money.
Yeah. So I just looked it up. So in 1996, John Spano attempted to purchase the New York Islanders, a professional hockey team, by faking his net worth. Sparrow claimed to be worth around $230 million. He claimed his earnings came through various business ventures, including telecommunications and real estate development. So he just said it. And it got so far as he's buying a professional hockey team in the NHL. It was in the news. That's how I know about it. It's still a story. You can Google that. New York Islanders fraud buy, and it's the first thing that pops up. So, yeah, you can now look up Solomon, whatever, fraud boxing commission. And in 25 years, this show will come up because I don't think we'll ever see this Solomon character promote again. As for Eric Botcher, the matchmakers are not the promoters. There's a separation there. And I guess he could claim some type of, he was just doing his job.
Yeah.
Yeah, he just did his job and he was paid for it. He got paid, so he didn't believe that that could happen. He could maybe tell story. He may be the guy who saw this guy blow some money in a casino, or you know, take him on a trip where they came to their deal and say, yeah, let's meet in Abu Dhabi to finish your and the guy blew 10,000 on a trip, and that was enough to convince Eric to throw his hat in there with him. But his reputation is sullied in my book, as a matchmaker on this, because uh, at the end of the day, the matchmaker is the guy who probably talked the fighters into the fight.
What I'm looking at is Fanmio even an app you can download in the App Store? Looks like it is, but it only has stuff from the Diaz Masvidal fight. It doesn't have anything like Cameo, talk to your favorite celebrities, blah 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 on there.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. It sounds to me too.
If I can look that up in 2 seconds, come on.
Yeah, here's the thing: is the guy also may have this application, and there are a lot of guys with a lot of ideas, right? But again, he says he's going to promote. Obviously, he's not really a promoter, and what he needed to do is be promoting his application.
Yeah, it's not even in the App Store.
In a rudimentary read on it as well, he he doesn't have groundwork for the application. We've been working on it for 5 years. Our users have gone up and up. What it looks like to me is it looks like he thought that the Masvidal Diaz fight would put it on the map and leave everybody in the world using his application. And I don't think phone apps and that sort of business works that way. I'm not sure, but again, that you remember, what was in it? DAZN.
Yeah.
They came out with a big blast and, a $300 million contract for Canelo and stuff. Now, DAZN is still around.
Mm-hmm.
Now they're still putting in the work and grinding out smaller shows and stuff. But I think that's what they should have done first, is been grinding on the smaller shows, and then maybe selected here and there some of the bigger names and things and started to escalate. But I think at the end of the day, what Solomon may have been doing here is trying to get a big bang at the very top that would take his app over the top. And when he realized that his users didn't really go up and that he's got no follow-up, and that, 3 days after the fight, you're back down to, close to 0 views or whatever, goes down, or close to 0 downloads or whatever, that you struck out and then you bail out.
Yeah. It's a fascinating thing. And I always love these shows where you can kind of fall back on your experiences to kind of tell people about this, because you don't see it much these days. If you're a new fan, this might be your first experience hearing about a fighter not getting paid.
Especially at this level, if you're, like I said, it might still happen at a lower level. The promoter struggling, and the guy was not paid his $300 or $500 or anything like that. But at some point, the commissions do present you some protections there. It is a different world, but again, the cyclical nature of there will always be frauds and people operating that are wannabes.
Yeah. It's fascinating. As always, I appreciate your time and when you're taking time to do this stuff, and I always want to let you talk about MMA Collector and, the dog rescue. This stuff we always let you end on.
Cool. So MMA Collector, we banged out a couple of episodes. You could be on the lookout for them next week. We got some classic fights. We got some interviews going down, and MMA Collector 74 on YouTube. It's something you should subscribe to for a good look at the history of MMA. It's always based around the MMA Museum podcast. So that's what we do. And the dog rescue, I guess that's what I do in real life, is work with a dog rescue down here in Costa Rica. Kind of always, it's bittersweet work because it can be very rewarding, but you see a lot of tragic things. But once again, I always point out, if you're in the United States and there's people in the States, you could probably look in your own state and help a dog out. And I actually think that dogs have it better here in Costa Rica. You know, if they're loose on the streets, some people feed them. So, you know, they have disease and there's problems like that. But some people feed them and there's not the overall cruelty. There are cruelty cases, but it's not the overall cruelty of, you know, having a local dog shelter euthanize, you know, 50 dogs a week. And
Yeah.
that's a state, in no exaggeration at all. It's an understatement. That's what's going on in many states in the United States. So if you're inclined to help, you know, help locally first. And if you want to donate to us here in Costa Rica, we will put the money to good use as well to save an animal. So
Yeah, and look in the show notes. That's where we have it. And really, you know, that probably would mean more to us than, you know, giving anything to us, honestly. You know.
yeah, for sure. I've never been pushy about receiving money on at the dog shelter here. It's an option because it's out there, and because to be honest with you, it's not easy to have to turn down an animal that needs help, or to not be able to perform some type of function of a rescue or a feeding or anything like that because of a shortness of funds. But rescues across the world face that on a daily basis. And like I said, if I'm trying to inspire people to, you know, actually jump in and help and not just feel bad for a little while. If you want to jump in and help, I assure you, in the United States locally, especially in states like Texas, uh, you know, there are other states, but Texas is probably the worst offender because of their laws. There are a lot of strays. Strays are taken to the to the shelters, and sometimes they get 3 days. 3 days. Who's going to adopt a dog in 3 days? What kind of, you know, ability do they have for the dog to even realize what he's gotten himself involved in? The dogs are nervous, and they get put down for being nervous. So it's really tragic. If you look in locally, you can help Tennessee. There are many states that put. New York City puts down a lot of dogs. California has, you know, Riverside. That area has, you know, some real slaughterhouses. There's actually probably thousands of dogs that get euthanized in the United States on a weekly basis or monthly basis. So that to me is something that, as the country we pretend to be, should surprise most people and will hopefully inspire people um to take some action. If you can adopt a dog or foster a dog or donate money to somebody who does, it's a worthy cause.
Yeah. You know, it's a great message, and you know, like you said, Miguel, inspire some of you to help. It's not necessarily have to donate to him, but even if you help somewhere else, that'd be good.
For sure.
Yeah. And you know, as always, we want to thank people for checking out these episodes. Be sure to subscribe to MMA Collector 74 on YouTube. And you know, we appreciate your support. And as always, until the next
Yeah, and don't
episode.
miss the Todd Atkins show. I know you're probably watching this on the Todd Atkins show, but if you haven't subscribed, hit like, subscribe, share, and most of all, comment. Let us know what you think.
Yeah. So as always, till next time, take care.
I'm gonna give you a shout out, Todd, because like a lot of people might not know how long you've been in the game for. I mean, Todd, you've been in the game since day one, and not a lot of people might not know it. It's to me, you know, when I see all these guys in the game, I always, you know, I just go, man, you don't know what the game is about because you ain't even been in it. You know, when I see guys like you involved, still involved, and like these new jacks come in, like they may not give you your respect, and they need to give you your respect because you've been in the game just as long as anybody. You know what I'm saying? So, you know, if y'all out there, y'all gotta recognize Todd been in the game since day one.